Hi, I'm Stephen Feinberg, Executive Director of the Rhode Island Film and Television Office. Our guest tonight is an extraordinary director, producer, storyteller, and I'm happy to say he's been my friend for 17 years. He's a Primetime Emmy Award winner, and he is Henry Bronchtein. Welcome to Double Feature.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. Now, Henry, you grew up in New York.
I did.
And but you now have moved to Rhode Island.
I am semi-retired in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. I bought a nice place by the water, and I'm very happily ensconced. Been coming here since we met 17 years ago, off and on.
Yep.
And yes, I'm now a Rhode Islander.
See, now there's an example of, that's a Rhode Island film story. You came here to work, you loved it, and you bought a home.
It's a beautiful state.
Yep. Well, we're happy you're here. Let's talk about your career, because you're very accomplished. As I said, you won Emmys for shows like The Sopranos. You've directed a few of my favorite episodes from that show. But you started out, wasn't your first big break working on Raging Bull for Martin Scorsese?
Yes. I was the apprentice assistant director on Raging Bull back in 1979.
Wow. You had gone to film school?
I did.
In New York?
I did. I went to film school. It was a passion. Theater was a passion of mine in high school. I ran my high school stage crew, and came to that point in life where you've got to figure out where you're going to go to college and think about what you're going to do with your life. And I'm one of the lucky few who actually got to do his dream job.
So, what was it like working on the classic Raging Bull? And did you know how great that movie was going to become? It is one of the greatest movies of the 1980s.
I did not know for certain. It's a very dark script, as you know. And it was
Joe Pesci, Robert De Niro,
Joe Pesci, who
filmed in black and white.
Joe was unknown at the time.
Yeah.
You know, that was where Marty discovered him. And, it was De Niro, it was Scorsese. They were already, Mean Streets, New York, New York. They were.
They had a simpatico.
Marty was already clearly a genius.
Yeah.
And I was very excited to work on it. And I knew it was going to be different and special. And watching Marty work was always special. And watching Bob De Niro work was always special. So I had a sense, but it was a very difficult and long, hard shoot,
Was there something in particular you learned being on that project at all about your career or about filmmaking?
I learned so much because I was green. I was an apprentice first of all, and my job consisted of I would meet De Niro's 5 a.m. makeup call, and get his coffee. Mm-hmm. And he would come to work. At that time in the beginning, when we were in L.A., we were shooting all the boxing matches, and Bob De Niro had been training for quite a while. And he would jog alongside the car that was there to pick him up to work from his hotel.
Really?
And he would come in all sweaty, and he would clean up, and then he would go into makeup. And he had a long makeup process because of the prosthetic nose to be Jake LaMotta. And so I learned a lot about the film business on that. It was my first big film, and it was one of the biggest, most involved projects, and I got to see storyboards at times, and see Marty's storyboards and the amazing things that were done to create those storyboards, and Michael Chapman was a DP, and
beautiful
I was working with a bunch of geniuses, and I knew that. Let's put it that way. I was in awe.
Did they rehearse, not rehearse? How did they work together, Marty and Bob De Niro?
I mean, There is a rehearsal process. There is a relationship. I wasn't really privy to a lot of that, of their conversations. I'm sure they had a lot of conversations. And really, Marty would go up when he wants to talk to an actor. He goes up and he talks very quietly to them. It's not public. He doesn't give the directions across the room. Right. So it's intimate. It was a very intimate relationship between them, and very, you know, often let's just do it again. It was incredible watching De Niro's performance, watching the camera work, the lighting. I mean, it was amazing. I don't remember how many fights we did in LA, but we were shooting a lot of footage. Oh. You know, Marty's storyboards are very intricate, and all the fights were completely choreographed, and all his shots are worked out. Yeah, everything's worked out.
It was cinema, pure cinema.
It's really cinematic.
So for those who have not seen Raging Bull, watch Raging Bull. You then moved on to work with another A+, director, Francis Ford Coppola, who had come off of Godfather 1, Godfather 2. He wrote Patton, and he did this movie, The Cotton Club, with Richard Gere, who was hot off of American Gigolo.
Yeah, Richard Gere and Gregory Hines.
What's that experience like, working on The Cotton Club?
Well, again, you know, it was you know, Francis is also his own kind of genius, and Francis was very interested at that time about where CGI and where all of like visual effects was going to go. Mm-hmm. It had nothing to do with the Cotton Club per se, but he did all the rehearsals against
blue screen,
crude green screen, and then he would like do it. He would do improvs with the actors in rehearsal periods. So like Bob Hoskins and Fred Gwynne had an improv that wound up in the film with the watch, and where he has the watch, and he would set it like a green screen, and then you would see on the screen they were in the middle of Paris, and he would talk about how this was going to be how movies were done. So his mind was way ahead of where the world was yet. Right. And then, you know, now, however many years later, it's like 35 years later, all those things he said have come true.
Well, what's very interesting is that at one point, he and George Lucas had that zoetrope.
Right.
So you had George Lucas, who was also groundbreaking and creating the Skywalker and THX and all that. And
it
Coppola,
was all after Star Wars.
Right, and Coppola had done also One from the Heart, where he was exploring that as well.
Yes, in Vegas.
Yes,
all completely.
Exploring that technology.
So he was very interested in that, and that was super fascinating to me as an aside. Yeah. Also, Francis came into the movie late. So he was hired to do a rewrite or to write it.
There was some kind of...
it's a famous producer, the one that the kid stays in the picture. Robert
Evans.
Robert Evans was going to direct it.
Francis Coppola knows film history. He knows the musicals. He knows cinema.
Yes.
Would you say it improved? That stuff improved?
Well, I think that Francis was interested in it historically being more historically accurate. He wanted the dance numbers to represent what happened in the Cotton Club at that time. He wanted the music to represent what happened at that time. And he did not feel, however, through his advisors, through his own knowledge, that it was accurate enough for him. Right. And he started over. And
what position did you hold?
I was the second assistant director.
Okay, yeah.
I was second AD. And we had Milena Cananero, costume designer, you know, Oscar-winning, amazing costume designer.
Who was the cinematographer?
We had Richard Silbert as production designer. I mean, again, Stephen Goldblatt was the DP. Yeah. Again, I was surrounded by...
the best. Veterans and the best.
Really talented people. Yeah. Extraordinarily talented people. Great hair and makeup people. And I mean, it was... And we shot it in the big house in Astoria on the largest stage, which no longer exists. It's been subdivided into, but a stage that we built the Cotton Club you know, like the size of almost a football field, I would say, between the club and the backstage and the upstairs was all on the stage.
Wow.
And, you know, the dance floor, Silver, again, he built it to the specs to make it like a real dance floor.
Right.
And,
Authenticity. Then you did a film totally different, Weekend at Bernie's. How was that experience?
well, you know, it was a black comedy, which I loved. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of my favorite genres, really, of that kind of dark humor. And
Right.
God, Terry Kaiser, I think, was the guy who played Bernie, and he took such a beating. He broke a rib doing because he
really?
was always like, he had to be like he was dead,
Dead.
and they would drop him, and he would go boom. So it was crazy, and we, you know, really a lot of fun to work on.
Were you laughing a lot on the set?
Yeah, laughing a lot and pulling my hair out a lot.
Oh,
you know,
great.
all kinds of things happened. You know.
And where was that shot? Weekend at
We
Bernie's.
shot that in North Carolina, Wrightsville Beach,
Yeah.
south of Wrightsville Beach. We built, the production design department and construction, built a house on the dunes that were protected. We got permission from the governments, federal government, state government, I don't know what it was. We had to, when we left, we had to take the house down and replant all the dunes.
Yeah.
We built a summer house to be the Hamptons in North Carolina.
Now, what was your position on Weekend at Bernie's?
First assistant director.
Okay, so you started out on the Raging Bull as an apprentice.
Cotton Club was my last job as a second assistant director.
Okay, but you started out as an apprentice. You're
I did.
working your way up. Now you're the first assistant director.
I did a lot of films as a second AD.
Let me ask you this, because I know where your career has gone to as a primetime Emmy Award-winning producer, nominated for the Directors Guild director. Did you have your sights on directing and producing as you're starting to gain more and more experience?
After I went to film school, like many people, I struggled for a few years to get started. And I think it was about 2.5 years till I got my first real job doing on a film. And so when I got the chance to become an apprentice in the Directors Guild, I was very excited and just happy to be in the business. And for several years, yeah, just several years, it was just working and make a career in the business. You know, do the best job you can, learn as much as you can. But in my heart, I think I always wanted to direct and produce. I just felt competent about, you know, my ability to handle all logistics and that kind of, you know, overview of the whole project.
Yeah.
So I moved in those two directions simultaneously. Like many people, life happens on a personal level that interferes often,
Yeah.
or maybe doesn't interfere, might not be the right word, but alters your path. You know what they say. You want to hear God laugh, you make a plan.
Right.
And so I got sidetracked many ways: marriage, children, divorce.
Yeah.
You know, illness, you know, and so, yes, I always wanted to direct and produce, and I think that was always the goal, and I've managed to do it in spite of everything.
Unbelievable, and you've done it so well. What about, so you now have done all of these films, then why don't we just do a little intro about how you got involved in The Sopranos, because we'll deal with more of The Sopranos when we come back. But first, how did you get involved in The Sopranos?
I was called by the non-writing executive producer, Eileen Landris, who was, I would say, an acquaintance, colleague, friend. You know, not a close friend, but I knew Eileen, and David Chase, who was going to direct the pilot.
This is for HBO, right?
This was for HBO, when one of their first, you know, along with Sex and the City and the Gary Shandling show,
yep.
one of their first series. And David Chase, who was the creator of the show, wrote the show, was going to direct the pilot, and he wanted an assistant director that had a feature film background. And I had a pretty good feature film background. He didn't want it to be like TV. He had worked in the network television world and wanted to quality of a movie.
And something that
that's how I got started.
Something that was very different, something that was groundbreaking, something that really took HBO to new heights and brought audiences that had never really come to. But let me just say this, Henry. We're going to continue to talk about your career and The Sopranos and your other shows that you've worked on. We'll talk about that at our next episode. But I want to thank you for joining us for this episode, part 1 of my interview with Henry Bronchtein. And we'll be back.